So let me kick this off by welcoming everybody to this Education SIG session that we are having. We've got TiE Global as now. My name is Vijay Menon. I'm the Executive Director for TiE Global. And we have kicked off 7 SIGs, which are special interest group for our charter members. And the Education SIG is one of the newer ones and getting a lot of traction. It's an industry that's undergoing tremendous transformation in this post-COVID world. And there are so many technologies that are changing. There is the way education is being delivered is changing, and that's what we're going to discuss today. We have 2 eminent panelists. We have Satish Jha, a charter member from TiE Delhi and TiE Boston. Satish is also a great investor in this space. And Satya Narayan, I think the name that most of you would know. He's the founder of Career Launcher and a bunch of other businesses around that. Satya has been in this education space for almost 25 years. So there's not much that he doesn't know about the space. I'd request Satish to kick off the session by introducing Satya and then taking it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vijay. I appreciate it. It's a great opportunity. And thank you for starting the TiE Education SIG. I think it's going to be one of the largest sectors in the Indian context in the coming years, trying to educate 25 million children every year, new children. That's not a small job. Let me introduce Satya Narayana R, as I see. He founded CL, Career Launcher, soon after his IIM Bangalore education. One of the early entrepreneurs in education who has done as well as it gets. And my own interest in education has been, I'm a child that Indian education, for all its questions and challenges, helped me find a place for myself, starting out from a village to a little town, all the way to the Ivy Leagues, and gave me an opportunity to reach the world stage in terms of experiencing it from the ringside. So that's what education can do. In the past 25 years, technology has greatly influenced what education can do, not only to individuals, to the great growth of the economy, country. India is spoken of as a nation of privilege with having demographic dividend. And that can only be possible if we can actually go and help every child achieve their dreams and their potentials. Satya has led that space for 25 years. And anyone who sought a career, who sought an education in a great place, could not have known his name or Career Launcher. And he's one of the few companies that went to stock exchange from education space. And he is a very charismatic leader, very talented person. And I thought it'd be a great opportunity to join him and have this conversation and share a few of his own ideas. I think the whole thing began with, after COVID, he was able to break into K-12 educational space in a significant way in Delhi. We are all curious how he did it. So I'd like to ask Satya, are you there? Satya?
Hi,
Yes. I would like to ask you, by sharing with us, how did you make this school of suddenly from Career Launcher to K-12? How was it made possible? And everyone is curious, how did you do this? It's not easy.
Yeah, thanks, Satish. I'm delighted to be here, and I would also like to start off by thanking TiE Global and Vijay. Of course, it's all our home as far as our giving back to the entrepreneurship is concerned. And I'm also excited about the fact that we are kicking off the SIG activities in a significant way. On the question about this K-12 that you mentioned, Satish, it was a more of a hunch that I had as the world was moving into COVID-19, that what I'm experiencing as an entrepreneur, running, it could be seen as big from one perspective, but from the context of education and children running into hundreds of millions across the world, and even if I take one state of Delhi, one grade has about 2 lakh children, and in all, if you take the entire Delhi government school system, that's about 20 lakh children from K through 12. So as I was helping my own company to quickly transition from the offline, which had now become impossible to deliver in the non-touch, non-movement world of COVID-19, as a advisor and strategic input giver to the Delhi government for the last few years, along with a few other governments in India, I found a couple of state governments being extremely open and entrepreneurial about trying new experiments because they were very sharply focused on the purpose. And that's what led me to a conversation with the education minister and the core team. And I said that perhaps it is important for us to be ready for the challenge if we cannot open the schools 15 days from now. And that looked like a little bit of a airy-fairy thing to say 15 days before COVID hit India. But given the work that we have done in the area of education, innovation, research, etc., with the state governments, including Delhi, that went off well. And over the next 7 days, we could put together a training and certification program for about 400 or so teachers who applied voluntarily to become online educators program, which was a 10-hour program, which had some learning in the beginning, and then some project that we asked them to do so that they could do things that they need to do hands-on, and then do the final project. So that happened. And then we quickly started onboarding the first bunch of 25-30 schools, only the grade 12 kids, and then a couple of subjects, math and science. And then we expanded the subjects, then we expanded the schools. And within a period of about 14 days, we had about 1.65 lakh children across humanities, sciences, and commerce, with about 50 to 60 active teachers teaching them, and another bunch of about 120 teachers working with them as co-pilots, co-teachers, doubt solvers, etc. And we also overcame the technology challenge because the Zooms and the Hangouts, everybody was discovering themselves. So we had to do some jugaad, as we say. Our platform, Aspiration.ai, was working for about 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 people. But here we had to cater to 55,000 kids for an English class of class 12. How do you do that? So what we did was to be able to build a bridge between the Zoom into YouTube. And we launched a new channel, and that already has about 2 or 3 million subscribers over the last 45 days. So it's been an exceptional success story. And all of this we are doing free of cost for the government kids. Delhi government is not paying, they're not paying us a rupee. And we found great partners in AWS and Intel who have come in with cloud support, given that free of cost, and also some cash support to take care of the direct little expenses. But everybody is actually doing what we call in our old age, Shramdan. A lot of intellectual dan, Shramdan, but it's a great experiment which can be taken to the world.
Let me thank you for the fact that you did that free of cost. That's one. And you did 165,000 children. I only am doing for 600 children free of cost in Madhya Pradesh, which is similar. We could take the school from learning and building to remote teaching in about 7 days' time. We could do that. Can you explain to us, to everyone who is present here, if you were going to do it in terms of business proposition, what would be the economics that you can see? Will it be a viable business proposition as an entrepreneur? As of now, you're doing free. The two questions arise. Is it a viable proposition as a model for others to work in? And how do we scale nationwide? Two things will be interesting from people who are joining us here.
Yeah. There is something it may sound a little philosophical, Satish, coming from a hard-nosed entrepreneur like me or like people like to see us as. But I've always believed that if there is an intrinsic and sustainable value that you can put on the table for the society, then the society finds its way to reward you or compensate you for the efforts. So I have no doubt in my mind that had I asked for money upfront, this program would have been a non-starter, as you know, the way it takes to work in India. Okay. Number two, I didn't want to, even if they were to give money and we were to take the money and then we were to fail in this experiment needed some bit of risk-taking appetite, then it would not have reflected well upon us. However, now that this is a success story, which the education and the finance minister, which happens to be Mr. Manish Sisodia, himself has reviewed it, and it's found great expressions in newspapers, media. It is featured in the global blog of Amazon.com globally. They have a fortnightly blog that comes out. It got featured there. Coming back to your question, actually the economics is very simple. What have we done? We have done all the assets that we have built for the last 25 years. Those are all completely depreciated but fully scalable assets. Because Career Launcher uses it for about 150,000 kids a year in any case. I've just doubled that numbers. So the only thing we need to make it a sustainable model for a full year is something as simple as this, Satish, and you might find it shocking. We need $8 per kid for a full year support.
Great.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it. So 550 rupees. And then for the new governments who are in talks with us, a couple of governments in Africa are in talks with us, a couple of state governments in India are in discussions. Bunch of government universities that are held by one holding guiding agency, those people are speaking with us, and we are telling them, go online with zero cost to train and certify your teachers, and per student 500 rupees. That's what we need.
Considering we have a vast country of getting to address 220 million children, would you be considering a franchise model just in case?
This needs nothing. This just is like, you don't need a franchise to distribute Google or YouTube. Just get on to it. You just need project managers who can run this from their 100 square feet office, and every teacher is teaching from her home. Child is learning at home. If they come back to schools, there will be a 20% shift in the design that will happen, and we are ready for that, because that's what we were doing pre-COVID.
Let me just bring in something which happened this morning. This morning's Wall Street Journal talks about, in a big way, how remote teaching has failed in America. Remote learning has not succeeded in America. How would you respond to that as an idea? Because obviously you have not read the article, so I won't put you on the mat for that. But the basic issue is the US looks at this experience with remote learning and education and teaching as a failure as of now. And what could possibly be the reason for our optimism in such situations?
Maybe I'll try and explain it by using a very different analogy, Satish, if you allow me. See, when we founded, when we built the cars, we did not desert walking. When we invented the jets, cars had their own utility.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very similar in education as well. Offline will not go away. Offline is for inspiration. Face-to-face is for motivation. It's for socio-emotional needs. That will not go away. However, it has its own large bunch of inefficiencies and conditioning-driven behavior. We need to question that and migrate using new technologies for those activities for which new technology is better disposed. But a collection of face-to-face, digital, live, as well as asynchronous. That's another nuanced thing. You don't have to have everything live. You can have on demand.
Exactly.
So there are. It's a fairly nuanced, layered conversation, and many articles where they have to quickly take a clear stance. They normally are not able to do justice to it. But I think there is room for a blended learning for a long time to come, which leverages technologies and human wisdom.
Am I hearing right that various pieces of the puzzle are being put in place, and it's how you put together that will decide how successful you are?
Yes,
My favorite example, Satya, is that if you look at the screen or a canvas, it has the same dots, and every artist faces the same dots. It's just the way they connect the dot. One becomes a Picasso, one becomes a street side vendor, right? It's
Absolutely.
just the way you
Absolutely.
connect the dots. So I hope this time you're going to inspire people to connect the dots right way. Let me ask you, since we are talking about it, what are the 3 or 4 main global trends in use of technology and education that you are seeing in this next 5 years?
So the way it's playing out, Satish, is, though we use a very broad, for a very broad world, we use one single term called education, but there are 4 or 5 subworlds in that, and these behave in a very autonomous, in a very independent way. One of them is the K-12 part. The other one is the higher ed part, and the third one is all about upskilling and reskilling, and the fourth one is essentially about consumer-led, supplementary education. Everything that then covers those things which are not covered by these 3 mainstream education parts, and each one is at a different stage, has different needs. So depending upon which one you would want to focus on, I'm happy for us to go into the conversation. But broadly speaking, 1 or 2 trends that I would like to mention, which are cutting across all these segments, are these. Number 1, I think the regulatory and policy entrepreneurship, if I may use the word, or reforms, are becoming now inescapable. I think you are finding that in many places, without which many of these, which have been there for 50, 60, 70 years, without any change, some of them are likely to collapse for a variety of reasons. For example, in higher education, in US alone, someone like a Michael Horn from Harvard, in his research, he talks about that there are going to be about 150 universities in US that are going to die in the next 5 to 10 years. In a country like Taiwan, Scandinavia, New Zealand, for reasons such as demographic nosediving, in Taiwan alone, about 50 universities are going to be shut down because there are no human beings, there are no students. It's a very out of the box problem to imagine when you are living in a country like India or US or Africa. On the other hand, if you go to countries like Kenya, Nigeria, Mauritius, and some of those African countries that we go and speak with, they are about 35, 40 years behind the wave that India went through from 1970 or 75 or 80. Infrastructure-led education is still getting done. Those guys can leapfrog the way India leapfrogged the landline telephony. So the beauty of it is, depending upon the geography and the segment of education we're talking about, the top 2 items will change quite significantly.
In fact, I've been looking for that cell phone of education. Remember, at one time I used to run 1 laptop per child.
Yes, of
and
course.
Then the best communication I could have was, I'm looking for creating a cell phone of education. That's what the OLPC laptop essentially looked like at that time.
Yeah.
And in fact, those who don't remember, in 1985 in India, to install a telephone line used to be 50,000 rupees, which is today's context about 500,000 rupees per person. Yeah. And if we continue that model, would have taken more than 150 years to meet the needs of the population at that time. In 95, we began cell phone. In 5 years, we had gone to 500 million people. So we're looking for a cell phone of education kind of a metaphor to see how we can do that. So I think that's what we are looking for, and how we achieve is the next kind of challenge. So what are the shifts in a fundamental way that you are noticing is happening in the Indian education space as of today, as you speak? The fundamental shifts.
Yeah. See, in the K-12 space, unfortunately, the shifts are very slow, and one of the factors that I'm very mindful of when I'm saying this is that, whatever we might say, 90% of education is delivered through public institutions, whether it's whichever state you take, there are a million government schools. So the awakening has begun to happen. Some of the states are very progressive. Delhi, Orissa, Telangana, some of these guys. Tamil Nadu has always been a little ahead for a few decades. Himachal is a little progressive. Uttarakhand is a little progressive. So some of these younger political leaders, supported by bureaucrats who are, I'm using the word, our generation or even younger, who are all, who were in college when India was liberalizing in 1991, they're all decision makers now. So the rapidity with which some of these policies are being looked at is very heartwarming. However, we know that this is a gigantic machinery, and everybody is likely to wait for somebody to succeed. And the transformation of education in Delhi is a great example in the last 5 years. And I would simply like to focus on education and not bring any political color to it, because whether it's a AAP or a Congress or a BJP, we know for the last 70 years that it is always that one person or a group of people who make a difference. So from that point of view, multiplying the budgets, I'm seeing a shift. Delhi government went from doing 2,500 or 3,000 crores per annum spent on education to today it's about 16,000 crores. That's a 5 times jump, or jumping from about 5 or 6% to about 22-23% of the entire budget size.
Yeah.
If you get the budgets, and then you get a very incorruptible leadership at the bureaucratic level and the decision-making level, and you let them free, you will see a lot of action happening. I've seen some progress in the last 5-7 years very well in the state of Telangana, in Himachal. And these are all ruled by different political parties. So I don't want to have any political color to it, but there is a color of budgetary allocation and the color of execution in a very hard-nosed way. If that happens, and the capital deployment goes from making physical assets to physical plus digital, we will be transformed in 5 years.
I would say one thing. When I ran one laptop per child, I got 17 chief ministers to accept the fact that they will buy 1 million laptops each.
Yeah.
But what they did was, in the process of purchasing them, they made different choices, which led to suboptimal utilization later on, and many challenges happen. Now, when I look at the budget in India, government school education overall budget is about 10,000 rupees per child per year. US education system is $10,000 per child per year, average, right? Now, does it explain in terms of quality of education that Pratham talks about? That in grade 8th, you may find average student does not have the skills of grade 4th. How do you bridge that gap?
I don't know it's a good or bad part, Satish, but you could have for the same budgets, you will find if you look at those benchmarking studies that are done, some states are doing exceptionally well with the same budgets. Some states or districts are doing disastrously with similar budgets or even more budgets.
Great point.
So the budget is a resource. However, it's not a determining factor singularly for the quality of outcome. There is a normal distribution curve. The whole effort must be, how do you push up the normal distribution curve? And that comes from education management. It comes from leadership. It comes from teachers training. And it comes from implementation, if I may call it, militariness in implementation. And,
okay.
and it can change.
Let me share with you. Recently, I saw some people sent me some of the RFPs of education departments in India, some states, but they look like still more of a purchase officer decision, right? They still are very hardware driven. There's about 6-7% goes into learning or software, etc. Rest is all hardware driven. How can we help them make better choices?
Unfortunately, that's true. And I must clarify, I hope I'm not coming across as here advertising government as a phenomenally exceptional machinery, transparent, all of that. In fact, I shy away personally as an entrepreneur. I shy away from any government business if I have to take money from the government, because that's not the way I think I have the capability to run business for many reasons that are known to everybody.
Yeah.
It is true. What you have said is true. That is the place where I was saying reforms, where reforms are required. Transparency is required. Most of it is back engineered by first deciding who will get it. The large established players who have been there for decades, they have a upper hand. That's a sad truth. Hopefully it will change. It has been very slow in my being around for the last 20-25 years. And there are times when we have gone very deep into governments, built businesses, but wrapped back, put the money off. We've done all of that. So if there's any entrepreneur out there who's looking at government as a customer potentially and in India, be very, very sure-footed about it. It's a very slippery ground. And I honestly, Satish, I'm neither competent nor do I have an answer that how can it be fixed without the political will and without a bunch of reforms.
I recall a situation when Kamal Rekhi, one of the founders of TIE Global Worldwide, he in the mid-90s came to the government and spoke about deregulation, policy reforms in telecom space. Do you think we should again as TIE go to the government with a proposal that this is what they should do for betterment of India and submit it to them so they can take a better view of it? Would that be a good idea?
No doubt. Absolutely no doubt about it. Absolutely no doubt about it. Because what happens is external influencing bodies, and you and I know we've been part of many such conversations over the last decades. We have known each other or TIE, that the people who wish it well, who are inside, even they need to be supported. They need to have some positive pressure points which are coming from people, and that's what I can do. The way NASSCOM does, the way CII does, the way ASSOCHAM does. And TIE can do it because TIE is actually even more democratized individuals who are coming back to contribute to the society after having proven themselves in their individual capacities as entrepreneurs. And not only that, when some such conversations happen, and we should take 1 or 2 states and then do that experiment and create that success story, what we can do are to give courage to the insiders to fasten their process of converting intent into action. Number 2, do it far more cost effectively. For example, if support from Google is needed, if support from Amazon is needed, if support from government organizations are needed, it's easy to put it together because everybody has to give their kind, which it takes a bunch of cash to do. So cost of capital goes down, speed of execution will go up, and the credibility goes up. And we have done it in a few states, as you know. TIE has championed entrepreneurship thinking. Even now, it is supporting a couple of state governments in doing the TIE, entrepreneurship curriculum and so on. It's a good idea if we have the energy, and if it's on a priority as an SIG of TIE, we should give it a try in a couple of states.
That's excellent. Let me ask you, because right now, whenever I've spoken to any head of bureaucracy or politics in education space in the past couple of months, they just want remote teaching, remote learning, remote education. They're all going for that, and they're all struggling how to make it happen, right?
Right.
So at this point in time, entrepreneurs have to come in. There's a big opportunity for them. What would you advise them as of today in the post-COVID, or rather, in the situation we are going to see in the years ahead, a couple of years? How can we take this opportunity to bring in EdTech and help schools improve the quality, and at least the 8th standard means 8th standard, doesn't mean 4th standard anymore. How do you think they should go about it? I mean, your advice.
Yeah, that's a great question, Satish. And I was doing another hangout with a bunch of EdTech entrepreneurs, and I was mentioning this very point. On one hand, this is a great time to go to market. because everyone who is in education is reasonably vulnerable about how does his future look. And when decision makers are vulnerable, they are that much more open to experimentation. So this is a good time if you have a good product, if it's solving somebody's problems earlier and you are not finding traction, and I've known and interacted with a bunch of them who are not finding traction for the last 5 years, and all of a sudden they've taken off. Okay. So the good part about the current situation is EdTech is 100% non-touch executable business. You must take advantage of that and go to market. What the entrepreneur must be very mindful of is this. While you will get an opportunity to demonstrate or integrate or go live with your product, chances are that you are not going to get the price that you were originally planning to demand for your product or service. Because the same vulnerable CEO, he says, I'll give you a chance, but I don't have money. The next 3 to 6 months, 9 months are looking extremely iffy for me. But you can do it provided you come at not at this price or at this price, or give it to me free for 3 months. Let me check it out. Which actually means that you need to have the cash in the bank to be able to quickly pick up customer base, build credibility, build testimonials, but not run out of cash. That's an important balance that they need to build. And if you can do this, this is a good opportunity. Go out there. The other very important point that I'm seeing, Satish, and you would know, you've seen education for a long time, the aggregation of products are beginning to happen. You know, not everybody can go all the way to raise the next 20 million, the next 100 million, and then become a large platform. So those that are ahead of your curve, you could use them, you could ride them, you could partner with them to hasten your go-to-market from 6 months to 6 weeks to 6 days. That's the other suggestion that I would give to the entrepreneurs, and then get the early success and then make your plans as success begins to gather momentum.
Can you recap that in 1, 2, 3?
So one good time to go to market, take advantage of it. 2, don't burn cash. Don't run out of cash in the next 6 months. It's very important, which means don't throw money at customer acquisition. And the way to do it, the point number 3 that I'm making is try and build partnerships for go-to-market. You know, the partnerships could be through revenue share, some other way of give and take, some win-win, some complementarity of services, completion of the bouquet. Logic could be anything, but build partnerships to go to market.
That's great. That's your advice to the entrepreneur. Now,
Right.
What is the advice you want to give to investors, those who are investing in this space?
I think it's for discerning investors, and I'm aware of a few who have made very smart investments, and hopefully it will come good. One, I would say, education post-COVID will not be the old normal. I don't know about many other industries. I can speak only for EdTech. In new normal, it has become very capital efficient. It has become, in some sense, more disruptive also, because now an entrepreneur can come and threaten me. So the old investee companies that you have had, those needs to be diligenced again. And the new investments that you could do at a much lower costs, and in areas that earlier were not even a pain point. For example, I'll talk about one specific startup called Impartus, based out of Bangalore. It's an alternative to Zoom. When Zoom ran into trouble and COVID happened, Impartus took off, and there are many such that are virtualizing campuses, virtualizing libraries, doing alumni management, doing video capabilities, doing research platforms on the cloud. There are a lot of people who are solving pieces of the problem. How do they come on to a platform that is already scaled, that has got customers. So I would urge, or I would advise investors to look at those platforms which can do a quick strategic in the next 2 years, number one, for an exit, or if it's a long-term play, those that are perhaps in stage 2 or stage 3 and well beyond proof of concept. There is a middle part that has become a little iffy.
Okay. So again, recap it, 1, 2, 3 for the investors.
One, early stage, look for those that are integratable into larger platforms.
Okay.
Larger platforms, look at stage 3. Stage 2s have become very iffy. Those who were looking like they're taking off 7 months ago, they have come back to the question mark. So focus on stage 1, who are early stage taking off, or look for stage 3, who have cash in the bank and who can do the pivoting and then stay on course without capital for 12 months. These are the 2 places I would focus on, and that's what I'm mentioning in a couple of funds where I'm on the board or investor or whatever.
Before I go to my next question, I'm picking up one question from our audience. One of the questioner says that the $8 you mentioned in terms of average per student, that is only when you have actually depreciated your assets or investments to 0. But if you have to start again today, afresh, what will be the number that you see?
Oh, it'll be $20 million, $30 million. How do you build all of those? I mean, and the time is not crushable. No, you can write a bigger check, but a bigger check cannot crunch time. So it is irreplaceable, and that's why the value of some of the assets that have been built over a period of time, they will become very valuable shortly.
Okay, so let me ask you, what kind of entrepreneurs, the new set of entrepreneurs who will look at this complexity in a totally new way that you can see emerging out of this process?
The interesting thing that I have always noticed over my journey, Satish, and I can see some names of audiences, some eminent entrepreneurs are there. You've been around for long. The interesting thing is that, this entrepreneur is a very strange creature. Each one is looking at the world through his own prism, identified a problem and already working on it. It's just that this environmental change either has put paid to efforts of some people in a negative way, because that hypothesis has been disproven very loudly due to COVID, or someone else's hypothesis has got accelerated because of the environmental situation. But speaking specifically of EdTech actually is a massive collection of about maybe 3,500 problems that are being solved by entrepreneurs. When I'm saying that, I'm actually giving you a more or less an accurate figure of high quality, reasonable quality EdTechs that currently might be at stage 1 or stage 2 investment plus globally. These are real numbers, 3,500, 4,000 EdTech startups that are working. So any problem that is half envisioned by you or me or quarter, or it's in our, we are blindsided by it, they're solving it. So we don't have to tell anybody, to any entrepreneurs, they're already there. If any, as a senior entrepreneur, if I may call myself so, or us who are little senior on the landscape, is our ability to pick the entrepreneur or to be able to make such an entrepreneur speak with us. I think that's the crunch for investors, for ties, etc. All problems that you can imagine, and those you would even reject outright, are getting solved there by entrepreneurs with his time and with his resources.
Let me ask you, one of the big issues about Indian education has been that it teaches us that 2 and 2 are 4, but doesn't teach us why are 2 and 2 4. In fact, I go back to my MBA class, the smartest kid we had, he asked a question, 2 plus 2 is 4, but why? And he was considered the brightest. He did very well. He sold his company to Microsoft, became very rich, he lives on a yacht now. The point is, how do we go from 2 plus, once I was giving convocation address to one of the IITs, and I said 2 plus 2, 4, 2 and 2, 4, 2 and 3, 5. right? I said, why is it 5? Okay, somebody said 6. I said, why is it not 8? Why is it not 9? Why is it not 1? And so on and so forth. So when does our education help us from knowing what information we give them, the students, to begin to learn, which is about know how to know? What will happen here? How can technology help in that?
It's an interesting point, Satish, and I'm reminded of CK, Dr. CK Prahlad, when you
Very
say
good
that.
friend of mine. Very good friend of mine of old times.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and I had the great privilege of getting CK to travel all the way to Hyderabad to inaugurate our school in 2005, and spending phenomenal time with the person who I thought knew entrepreneurship like no one else that I have known in my life. And CK was very fond of this one presentation that he used to do, and I use it even today when I take sessions for TIE, the Young Entrepreneur Program in Delhi and so on. And there is one thing that he ends that he talks about 4 principles of entrepreneurship and ends by sharing one finding in one of his researches. And that finding is that he polled 500 top CEOs and entrepreneurs globally and asked them the question, what are the top 10 skills that you see that you see as important to be a successful entrepreneur? And the unanimity, and these are his words and his PPT, I'm happy to share it with people. Anybody asks me, the number 1 skill unanimously, or maybe near unanimous, by the CEOs was the skill, the imagination. So that imagination is what makes somebody who looks at 5. I'm coming back to your question. Who looks at 5, he doesn't even have to say 2 and 2. He will find a million ways to reach 5, because he looks at the destination first, the way Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind, and then you connect the dots backwards. So in my view, education can be improved. Education can take big strides. However, imagination is something else. Imagination can also be encouraged as part of education. It should be. But I'm not willing to say very strongly that if you fix education to its ideal state, everybody will turn or should turn entrepreneur. So I don't know if I'm coming across as confused or I'm confusing the people. There is a space for structured, logical part of education. It's very important. But there is room for the unstructured, imaginary part of creating the world. These two must toggle, or would toggle very effectively to learn from the strengths of one another. That's how great organizations have been built. It's not all about right brain, it's not all about structured thinking, but a good mix of both, and leaders perhaps who are able to build a team that manage that at various stages. So education can solve problems, but there is something else that happens. I don't know if it is DNA, if it is family, if it is informal education at home, knowing the world, real world experience. Some other things also are equally important in my view.
I'll take you from this to, in fact, what my son, a 6-year-old, reminded me. Education is what the school teaches me. Learning is what I want to learn, right? So he posed in such a way. He was 6 or 7 years old, and when I shared that with the good old readers and friends of ours like Azim Bhai and Narayan Murthy, they all were so, at that time, I'm looking 20 years back, they really were wowed by that question, and they began thinking of it. My point is, technology could probably help us go from education to learning environment. And once they begin to learn, and then somebody asks the question, people talk about Baiju as a personalized education tool. Is that right? Is Baiju a model which is emerging in India as a personalized education tool?
No, Baiju may not be an example of that. Okay. If you want me to take an example of that, I would say a Code Academy. I would say a Khan Academy. a little closer, there are two parts to it, Satish, and one is the more, the unfortunate part or the funny part of it is adults decide what the child should do. Okay, and adult is technologically more challenged than the child. In any home, every father and mother will admit that their child is a league ahead of themselves, whether it is Steve Jobs' child or Bill Gates' child or Narayan Murthy's child or my child. So we are talking about apples to apples, apple from the same home and the small apple from the same home. But it is the adults who decide what the child must do. And as long as it is around creating the safety net that the child must not fall into incorrect places of the world, and the adults take care of, that's fine. But there is a very funny example I'll give. There was a time when it can be argued, I'm not getting deep into mathematics, but three-dimensional geometry is more real than the two-dimensional geometry.
True.
But we teach two-dimensional geometry in grade 3 and grade 4, and we say because the equation has got a polynomial and this and that and integral, we teach the cube and cuboid in grade 9, 10, 11, 12, but you teach square and circle, which are imaginary things, to a child in grade 4 and 5. Can it get funnier than that? And we have run schools for 15 years, and so I'm saying it as a teacher who has taught grade 6, grade 8, grade 9, number one. Number two, in my school, I used to teach a common class of Hindi, English, and Urdu together. I write in Urdu. I want children to learn their mother tongue Hindi before they become shusha in English, while that's a job of language of the world. But why do you need English alag, Hindi alag, Urdu alag? But if the teacher has the autonomy to imagine, we used to have a teacher in our school who would teach harmonic waves with guitar. So physics and guitar he would do in the same class. Now, it could be argued that these are outliers. But that's what brings me to your point. When technology is available, that teacher can now be available to anybody in the world. The calculus teacher from MIT, Indian kids who are preparing for IIT JEE, they watch his program. Because he makes calculus so lucid. Even if the child understands 70% of English, he understands 100% of calculus. I think those are the massively groundbreaking innovations that are waiting to happen. And when the world becomes a global village, my hunch, Satish, I don't know, this is not answering to your question, my hunch is some such solutions will come from individual entrepreneurs like the Khan or a Baiju or a CL or a Let's Connect or some such startup, and it will come out of Asia because they will also disrupt the pricing by a factor of 20 or 30 or 100. Like you mentioned, in India, it costs 10,000 rupees for a full year of education. In the US, it costs $10,000. That's a massive price performance disruption. And I think I am very, very keen to see that in my lifetime. I hope I play a part in it.
Wonderful. Let me ask you, have you watched the various models of EdTech emerging in US, Europe, yes, India, Asia? Say, let's take some examples if you have in mind. Can you contrast them?
That's an invitation to actually I'm going to come across a little biased because that's a view.
Sometimes bias is good.
But the innovations that I am seeing in EdTech in India is now perhaps from the product perspective as well as price performance perspective, it is beating the innovations that I am seeing today from the US. It was not the case a decade ago. About 7, 8, 10 years ago, I began to see Chinese innovations as cutting edge. And many of them have gone on to become behemoths. A couple of them have gone on to get listed, become scaled. India has not come of age yet. Perhaps next 5 to 10 years, India will do that. And in Africa, payment related stuff, I'm seeing payment and education, that part, I've seen a couple of very innovative startups even in Africa. So coming back to your question, Satish, there are many problems that people are seeing in the developing world, which is forcing entrepreneurs to devise problems at a very, very low cost, because without that, there is no future for them. And then people are discovering it's India first, world first as an attribute. Today, if you talk to many Indian investors, they use this additional filter, which was not used about 5 years ago, saying that is it like the Flipkart was inspiration from the US. That age today is over. Today people are saying, okay, if it is Byju's, if it is Alma Connect, if it is Let's Connect, if it is NotesGen, these entrepreneurs are able to establish that, sir, I am like nobody else in the world. And if I conquer India at this price, my next stop could be Singapore or Dubai or to the US. And a couple of companies have caught the attention of investors, and they have completely pivoted, gone with the front end to the US, and then the back end and engineering stays in India. I'm sure you're aware of many such examples. In the interest of time, I'm not jumping deep into illustrations, but product engineering, customer problem solving, identification, that has begun to happen very big time in India, in Indonesia. It's emerging as a very interesting market. Bangladesh is emerging as a very interesting market. So I'm talking on behalf, or I'm making an observation for across the developing world, which are high population density, lower per capita, the innovations are very price disrupting, and then they are scaling. I'll give you one or two examples just to close this. People must be wondering, are there an example? See, cloud internships. Indian government, MHRD, has formally approved that a student can do cloud internships in India. It's not a practice in any country in the world, which means a student who is in 3rd year of engineering can now get onto a cloud platform, and then he enrolls himself there on aspiration.ai, and then does an 8-week internship of solving a real world problem using machine learning or AI or data science, etc. He gets assessments and certification done, and that is recognized in terms of credits by the MHRD AICTE. When guys like AWS got to know about it, they have taken that and taken it to the US, and they are doing pilots there. So some very interesting stuff is happening.
Let me ask you, do you see any room for audio-based programs or TV or radio-based programs in areas where there's no internet still? Because I think it's still 80% area is not covered by internet villages, except the cell phone, wherever the cell phones are, and the reception may be rather weak. So is it possible that they can use radios or internet and TV, etc., instead of internet?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that
Any
will
model
not.
For that? Any model you have in mind?
I think a couple of states are quite in the middle of implementing that, including Delhi and Kerala, because when on 15th of July the schools reopen, they will have to be available with this, and the device and internet access problem is still solvable. Device is still solvable, but they will take time. So until that time, some innovated blended solution which uses television for broadcasting and some mobile-based asynchronous hack which is used for doubt solving and engagement, those are being put in place. If anybody is keen to know more about it, I'll be happy to pick that up offline as a follow-through.
So someone wants to know if they want to start a school tomorrow, right? And want to have both school and include technology. What is the suggestion that you want to give them from both investment being good and outcome being good point of view. Any suggestion that you have off your head?
Yeah, I think while they want while a physical K through 12 school, the tail wags the dog. You need to have 27 approvals before you can start a school. So it's a long 24-month journey from land and building and fire to municipality and a bunch of stuff. So assuming that that is there with you, or that you will solve as a problem that you know better than I do, the focus should be from day minus 180, Satish. By day minus 180 or day minus 100, the focus must be on technology and teacher capacity building. If these two are done well, school will do well. If these two are not done well, there are today schools in India which have got infrastructure that is worth 100 crores, but they're shutting down because the market is shifting. It's not the same market as it was in 2005 or 1995.
Let me ask you, since you have the best view, I've just invested in something. We have created a 300,000 questions data bank. Okay. Idea being a child is able to go through the questions, and there's a peer group of questions, teachers have questions. If you raise questions, it makes you curious. You think that's a good investment from taking it to the school's point of view? How can we make it monetizable and how can we make it viable? Any thoughts on that? 300,000 question bank for students as such.
So, Satish, in our industry, in education industry, I can hack you and give you 1 million questions in 7 days time. You just
Great.
give me, so that's a commodity. Content is a commodity. I think what has premium is what problem are you solving? And this is in education, it may not be viewed or described like that, but education is the most hardcorely measured B2C business. See, even if you buy the most expensive pair of shoes from Reebok or a jeans from Levi's, in the worst case, only that goes wrong. And you can shift to another brand after 1 year or 6 months. In education, when you give the 20,000 rupees, 30,000 rupees, 100,000 rupees, you're actually surrendering your next 1 year for a specific outcome. The outcome might be to go to an NDA or an IIT or do well in the board exam. So this investment that you're talking about, the hard question that you must ask of the entrepreneurs is, what is the problem you're solving? For example, you don't even need 100,000, 300,000 questions. Let me flip it and say something very contra-intuitive, Satish. There are startups, something called as a doubt nut. Their promise is, you throw a doubt at us of maths or physics or English, we will solve it to you in 3 minutes.
Super. Okay.
That's it. It's absolutely simplified business problem. Does it have a value to a student? Nothing is more valuable. And you and I have been students for a dozen years or more. If I have a doubt about a question, I want instant gratification for that more than in an ice cream situation. I can defer that later. Here I'll get frustrated. So you don't need a question. Even 1 million questions could mean nothing.
No, in some ways, all the knowledge is available on the web. Point is, how do we organize it? In organizing is the value. I hope we are on the same page. To close it now, I would request you to give us, again, 3 messages for the investor, 3 for entrepreneurs, 3 for school principals. and these 3 will be very valuable. I'm waiting for you to share with us.
Okay, maybe in the interest of time, or to even distill it from 3 to, I'll go with 1 perhaps for each.
Let's go 1. That's fine. 1.
Yeah. For entrepreneurs, and this is an eternal rule, but is never more truer than today's world. For an entrepreneur, be super aggressive in customer acquisition, but cash is your only truth. Not your P&L, not your balance sheet, not your market cap. So focus on cash, focus on customer acquisition. There is no defense play that is possible right now. That's for the entrepreneurs. For the investors, re-diligence and reassessment of current investment portfolio is a must. If you're looking at new, look at more early stage or much later stage who can integrate those who are going to be in the middle and who are struggling. That's for the investors. For the education leaders, including principals, the inefficiencies and the black box within which they were hiding a whole lot of inefficiencies that has been exposed. So it's a very politically incorrect statement to make, but let me say that take advantage of the situation and do a drastic technology-led reform of your 9 yards of business, whether you're a university or a school. Everything can be digital today, from customer discovery, application, admission, entrance, teaching and learning, internship, placements, go out. All of these are today digitally possible. If you're resisting, you are likely to be falling behind more rapidly than it was happening pre-COVID. So time to innovate is now.
Great. No, I would like to thank you very, very much. I think our time is coming to a close.
Yes. Yeah.
And I appreciate very much your insights. And like I always said, you're one of the most charismatic, magnetic person in the space, and look forward to having another conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Satish. Thank you, Satya, on behalf of TiE. Wonderful session, and we'll share the recording of the session with with the entire Education SIG, and many of the attendees have asked for it. I think they came in the middle, etc. We will share the recording, and look forward to having many more such conversations with you and others in this SIG. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Satish. It was a privilege.
Bye-bye.